say I'm deeply honored that we have Bank of Communications with us today as a lead sponsor. Capital Link went into the Chinese market 4 years ago in partnership with Columbia Ship Management. We have Mark O'Neill here, and also with Terence Zhao from Shanghai Marine Services. So in those 4 years, I think we have managed to make our presence well known in China. We made great friendships, and I think one of those great friendships is having Bank of Communications with us today in Athens. So it's a big achievement for us, and I'm grateful for your being with us today, and of course for the support that they give to Greek shipping. You know, I speak in words, he's speaking with money, so thank you. Without any further delay, I would kindly ask the first panel of the day to start, Mr. Chryssakis. So as you guys are coming to the podium, I will kindly ask for the disclaimer to go on. So we have to respect in this conference the European Union competition laws. So our discussions today need to be within the context of what is permitted. We are not going to speak about individual pricing, individual companies and strategies. We will focus on large sector discussions, and we just wanted to portray that. Please, Christos, take over. We'll start with what we think is one of the key topics of the industry today, the marine fuels, and then we'll go to IMO, environmental compliance, and so on. So please keep the time.
Thank you very much. So while our panelists are taking their seats, I would like to welcome you here today as well. My name is Christos Chryssakis. I'm a business development manager for DMVGL. And the topic of this panel is, we think, a very hot topic these days, navigating the new world of marine fuels, 2020 and beyond. And we all know that time for implementation for the sulfur cap is very short, less than a year now. There are several uncertainties still, which makes the transition even more challenging, and there is not one solution fits all. So will have to be evaluated on a case by shipping companies. So for that, and hoping to give you some clarity, we have 3 excellent speakers with us who actually I think they will spend the rest of the year talking about this topic, but they will have to limit themselves to 35 minutes today. First, Armelle Breneol from ExxonMobil. She's a marine fuels technical advisor. She has a long experience with ExxonMobil and also has experience as a seafarer. So I think she's very well suited to help us understand the fuel side of things. Next, we have Diomidis Stamoulis, senior manager from Hellenic Petroleum. Also with a long career in the refining industry, so we can have the refining aspect. And finally, Steve B., Group Commercial and Business Development Director from Veritas Petroleum Services. So we also can understand a little bit more about testing of fuels and what we need to be careful about. So with that, I would like to start with some questions, and maybe the first question that comes to mind is that everyone is wondering what is going to be the fuel mix in 2020, in January 2020. What kind of fuels are we going to be using? Is it going to be more 0.1%, 0.5%, distillates, residual? Is there something you would like to say on that? Maybe we can start with you, Armelle, and then...
Yes, first of all, good morning, everyone. At ExxonMobil, we strongly believe that we are heading towards a multi-fuel future, given the requirement to reach the 0.50% sulfur content. There will be several ways of obtaining this sulfur level, and from there we believe we are heading, as I said, toward a multi-fuel future, from residual to distillate to blended fuel. Yeah.
Do you want to?
Good morning, everyone. I'm also of the same opinion, and if we see today the fuel mix consisting mostly 70% of the old type of 3.5% high sulfur fuel oil, and the rest 30% split between something like 5% of low sulfur fuel oil and 25% distillates, I can say we are moving to a future that these percentages are going to change in a direction where distillates will prevail more in that available fuel for shipping, probably will account for something between 40 and 50% of the future fuel, and the rest will be a mixture depending on the selection of the shippers to replace their fuel or continue use the high sulfur fuel with some scrubbing equipment, will be probably split half and half, say 25% between a high sulfur grade and the new 0.5% sulfur grade. This is my view of the future slowly as we change the specification.
Morning, everybody. I think, again, I concur obviously with my fellow panelists here. I think the fuel mix is still unknown, certainly with respect to absolute values. And this is because not every shipping company has revealed or decided upon their strategic course. And also suppliers, not all suppliers have made it known what types of fuel and volumes, etc., prices will be available come 2020. So really, all we can simply state is that it is going to be a mix of HFO used with scrubbers, 0.5% sulfur fuels and fuel blends, distillates, some LNG, and obviously in the ECAs, 0.1% sulfur fuels and distillates. So it's very difficult to really absolutely predict what the mix will be in the values. What I can inform you is obviously as we have 4 laboratories across the world, one in Asia, one in the Middle East, one here in Europe, and one in the States. We have seen a change in the fuel types that we're being asked to test. The latest picture, just to give you an overall view, is that we're currently testing around about 56% of our samples are residual, about 40% are distillates, and about 4% are the 0.1% sulfur fuels. We've seen a big change in Singapore over the last sort of 6 to 8 months, where the gas oils that we're receiving now account for 30% of our samples. And if you went back to the beginning, this time last year, it was probably only around about 18 to 20%. So even in the Singapore region, we're seeing an increased use of distillates, which obviously, backs up what Diomidis is saying there about increased distillate usage. Here in Europe, we're seeing about 9% of our samples are 0.1% sulfur, and the mix between HFO and gas oils as sample submissions are pretty equal, about 46% HFO and 45% MGO. And if you went back to the time of the ECA change, we were looking at 80% residual and 20% distillate. So distillates really are coming more to the fore over the last couple of years, and there seems to be an increasing momentum towards that fuel type.
Thank you. Maybe you can say a few words about what refineries are doing to prepare, or fuel producers are doing to prepare themselves to be able to serve the shipping industry, both in terms of reducing the amount of HFO that comes out of the refineries, but also in terms of preparations that need to be done for fuel producers to be able to supply the required fuel to their customers. I think that will be very interesting to understand that aspect. If you want to start.
Okay, start. How we are preparing for IMO 2020, January 1st? I would say first you need to know that we have started already several years ago to be ready for January 1st. And I want to say the idea is not to be ready for January 1st, but before that. Because if we want the vessel at sea being compliant on January 1st, it will be, they will have to prepare first. We suppose they are currently preparing, and they will have to organize their implementation plan, as it's called by IMO, to ensure the compliance on January 1st. So meaning, if the choice is to go to a 0.50% fuel as a compliance option, this option will have to be worked, I would say, fourth quarter 2019. So us, we are preparing to be ready, I would say, fourth quarter 2019, to be able to deliver this new 0.50% sulfur fuel. And in your question, it was about how we are preparing. I would say each refinery is different. It had been a screen on available streams that could meet the 0.50 sulfur cap, refinery by refinery. Currently, very often we are stating that there is no two sister refinery as we can have some sister ship vessels. So from one refinery to another, it will be potentially very different type of fuel that will be available to reach the 0.50 and different way of obtaining this sulfur content. That may vary from the crude selection up to the different type of units that are available within the refinery. This is for me.
More or less, we follow a similar route. We know that we have to be ready before the implementation of the new specification. As a refiner here in this country, we plan to offer our customers both fuels, the existing one for those that want to use it with the scrubbing system, and the new one, and agree very, very much with Armelle that every refinery has different flexibilities and opportunities available to prepare this new type of fuel. One of them is to start from materials, crude oil, that contains less sulfur and go all the way down and produce a mixture of some heavy residual with some diluent in order to obtain the specification. Another one is to desulfurize some of the components during the process. This gives a big variety of final products, and this is what makes us very cautious for the final product, because we have to be very careful. First of all, we as suppliers, in order to keep very clean logistics, how to separate these different materials in order to deliver them properly and not mixing them and causing problems of incompatibility or other type of problems. So this requires a long-term preparation, studies and tests, and a well-planned logistic system in order to be prepared at time and with safety. What I want to say just to close my position is that usually during all these periods, requests for changing specifications in fuels were here all the time, and refineries and technology of refining petroleum was ready to give an answer to them. This one is a very peculiar change in specification. Normally, we wanted to have a fuel with a better calorific value properties and viscosity adjusted for the engine. Now we request from the fuel to have 1/7 of each sulfur content, but nobody says what will happen with the other properties, viscosity and density. This, in principle, gives a lot of possibilities to achieve this sulfur specification, but does not guarantee how to get out of trouble with the variety of the products that will result just because of that. And this is something that requires from all of us to be in close cooperation. This is what I want to say.
Steve, do you want to make some comments, or should I start?
I can make just a brief comment on, obviously we're not refiners, we have no influence on the fuels that come out, but what we can do is, and what we have been doing, is certainly working on R&D programs with proposed new formulations, etc., just to try and ensure and give more information that the fuels will be compliant and fit for purpose.
If you agree, perhaps I can add something on that one. Fully agree with your comment, Diomidis, that the fact that today, from a refiner perspective, the first objective was to reach the 0.50% sulfur content. Meaning when we have done some screening within our refinery, the first objective was to find a stream that can meet the sulfur content. But what we have done, and so not nobody have said that. And as at ExxonMobil, the way we have worked it is that we have done a very rigorous fit-for-use assessment, as we call it, of the different streams that we have identified to ensure that on top of the sulfur level, combustion quality, viscosity, compatibility behavior will be worked on top, behind the ISO 8217 spec, because it's true that it will be key tomorrow. There is, I would say, in brackets, plenty of low sulfur stream available in a refinery if we want. Now the next step is to ensure they will burn properly in an engine. Thank you.
Yeah, and you're touching upon the next questions that come, I guess, naturally to mind. And but maybe before going directly into that, you talked about different refinery technologies, also refineries that are no sister refineries, and also that everything depends very much on the crude that you have to start with. So do you expect any large regional variations just because of availability of different crude qualities in different parts of the world, and also different technologies available in different parts of the world? Do you want to say a few words about that? And then we can move into more details about making sure that you are safe.
Yes, I do believe that this is inevitable, because availability of different type of crudes in different parts of the world is one fact. Second, refineries have different technologies available for them. As you mentioned at the beginning of your talking, you said that refiners have also ways to get rid of this heavy residue. Actually, this of course doesn't give a solution to the product required by the shipping industry, but it is a way out of a refinery, because you understand very well that a refinery has to sell everything from what has as an intake. So has to transform all the intake to useful products and sell them at a price. So one way to tackle the issue is to go full down the cracking process and produce carbon. And from that carbon, later can produce energy, either by gasification or as a carbon. But this is not the solution. Now, coming back to the variety of the products, having in mind that we have different feedstocks for the refineries in several places of the world, different processes, I see that we have at least a matrix of 4 variations in viscosity and chemistry. So I see type of fuels complying with a 0.5% sulfur content that will be more aromatic in chemical nature or more paraffinic. And then we are going to have on top of that a second dimension, type of fuels that will have a more residual nature, that will come out of the heavier components of the crude, or will have a more lighter nature coming from the middle distillates area. So already this gives a big variety combined with the geography, and this is something we have to be very careful how to handle it. Thank you.
You want to comment on that, or?
Yes, just to add on the fact that we have already, within our discussion with ship owner and ship operators, that yes, we believe that there will be differences from one port to another in terms of product type availability, and potentially this could change a little bit the lifting pattern from a vessel owner, depending on tank segregation on board one vessel, for example. If there is a need to look only for residual fuel or distillate fuel, unless there is enough tank segregation on board the vessel to ensure, I would say, to limit compatibility question. Reason why part of our work that we have done within our fit for use assessment, the compatibility question have been considered of being of utmost importance.
Thank you, Armelle. And that brings me immediately to the next question, which I would like to start with Steve here. With all this variability that we should expect, what can we advise shipping companies to do? What can they do in terms of ISO specifications? What can they do in terms of testing? If you want to comment on that, please.
I think the first thing to say, certainly with regard to testing the quality of the fuel, is wherever possible, try and buy the fuel against the latest revision of ISO 8217, because that latest revision will certainly improve protection, as it's written really with sort of the more recent fuel issues in mind. I think, however, for things like residual fuels, tests such as reserve stability number will complement things like the hot filtration sediment tests, and providing more information on predicted asphaltenic dropout. And I think with potentially a wider range of cutter stock materials and additives and other blend components as you go through the supply chain, being possible to be introduced to such fuels. I think what we're seeing is maybe little quality control across the full supply chain. So in my mind, I think things like looking at chemical screening is a minimum additional requirement to the ISO 8217 suite of tests. Also, I think testing residual fuels in order to monitor the efficiency of the vessel's fuel delivery system. ISO 8217 really only applies to the fuel as it hits the ship's rail. After that, obviously, the fuel's stored, treated, purified, filtered in various ways, and all of this can have an effect. So monitoring the efficiency of the fuel delivery system and how that can possibly change the chemistry of the fuel prior to introduction to the engine is also key. I think from a distillates perspective, monitoring lubricity to combat fuel pump issues and engine damage due to reduced sulfur levels affecting the natural lubricity of the fuel is also key in low sulfur fuel distillates. If you're sailing in cold waters, then obviously I think monitoring or closer monitoring of the cold flow properties of distillates, so your pour point, cold filter plug-in point, and cloud point again are key. And certainly, from respect to storage and crevices within the delivery system, monitoring bacterial growth, especially as I say, in terms of the storing of these fuels on board. And also we still have potential issues with biomaterial presence and the issues that can bring with these fuels. So A217 to the latest spec will give you better coverage, but there are still wider implications and maybe further things that we should look at across both residual and distillate.
Is there anything else that you'd like, Armelle or Diomidis?
Just, I agree fully with Steve. It's very crucial, the handling processes we need to establish in this new era of this low sulfur fuel. Until now, we had a product that more or less was similar. So interchanging was easier. Now having this variety is very crucial to plan and organize storaging, transportation, and pretreatment of the feed to the engine. Maybe engines are versatile and can handle a lot of fuels, but still we need to respect the requirements for that. And this is important.
If I can add on this, which I fully agree, what you have said, Steve and Diomidis, is that we need to consider to move from fuel procurement to fuel management. Because tomorrow, the crew on board the vessel, depending the tank segregation they will have available, depending their, I would say, the call they will have to do in the different ports, potentially there will be a need to manage, to have really a fuel management to understand what will be the next port of call where the fuel type that will suit the tank segregation on board will be available. Meaning that if today potentially we purchase the fuel when we need the fuel, tomorrow there will be a need to have a fuel management considering the 2 or the 3rd port where we will have to make a bunker for this particular vessel and to think about it. So really, as mentioned by you, Steve, ISO 8217, the latest specification is crucial, first, in terms of product quality. Then to ensure that stability, compatibility, and combustion properties of the fuel have been worked from your supplier. And to ensure that the crew is fully aware of what is arriving on board the vessel and what they will have to handle in terms of treatment. Because the treatment of the fuel is key. We call it at ExxonMobil from time to time a good housekeeping from the time the fuel is reaching the storage tank up to the service tank before entering the engine. This is where certainly tomorrow the crew on board the vessel will have to have either an increased knowledge compared to what they can have today on fuel characteristics and properties.
And just to continue a little bit on that, you talked about the role of crew on board, but what do you see the role of onshore personnel being on that, or bunkering departments? Can you make some comments about that? So bunkering.
You mean how it will be linked between the
or how bunkering strategies of the shipping companies could help in that?
Well, in terms of buying strategy, perhaps I am not the best one to answer, but what is key, it will be this transition period, I would say, between now and January 1st, 2020. If a vessel wants to be compliant on January 1st, the implementation plan should more or less be already in place, and the crew on board the vessel, linked with the onshore personnel, I would say, as a bunkering strategy, they should already know or have already worked the transition plan in terms of tank cleaning. Needed, yes, no. This will depend tank by tank on each vessel. It can vary very different on a big proportion if we are speaking of a brand new vessel going out of the shipyard, or if we are discussing of a 10 years old vessel with some storage tank having a kind of ROBs that have been built for 10 years potentially. I can share with you a recent example that was shared with us during last conference, where in terms of preparation, a vessel owner have started to make some analysis of the ROB on board the storage tank. And in one of its tanks, they have found a level of aluminum silicon, because this is a characteristic we haven't yet discussed in detail, but the level of aluminum silicon in this storage tank was 20,000 ppm. So meaning, if you are not cleaning this tank before loading a 0.50% sulfur fuel, which can be, for example, a distillate fuel, which will have a kind of cleaning effect, you will clean the tank and with the distillate fuel, yes, and potentially have all this heavy stuff at the bottom of the tank reaching your filtering system, your centrifuge, and with a 20,000 ppm level of aluminium, there is a big risk for your engine. So you see, the bunkering strategy, I would think that today it's more to focus on the transition plan vessel by vessel, tank by tank. This is how I see it for today.
If I just add to what Armelle was saying, certainly on the subject of cat fines, if we go back to 2013, 2014, when we had the 1% sulfur limit in the ECAs, we saw a lot of issues with fuel quality in respect to residuals, where almost 1 in 3 showed at least one off-specification parameter within ISO 8217. And it was due to, obviously, a very high level of a blending of that fuel type. So as we go towards, obviously, the 0.5% sulfur, 0.5% sulfur isn't too far away from 1%. And we are anticipating blended residual distillates to maybe exhibit maybe higher cat fine properties. And again, it adds sort of more credence to the fuel system checks within a vessel's fuel delivery system, to ensure that we do remove these potentially higher levels of cat fines as part of that process. So I just wanted to add that to Armelle's comments on cat fines.
Thank you. I would like, we are almost running out of time, but is there a short question from the audience, maybe? Yes? Is there a microphone we can use? Or maybe if you can ask a question, and please repeat the question.
One issue we haven't touched upon is price. And the next panel, we'll be looking at IMO 2020 from the point of view of scrubbers, and also ballast water, but as a separate issue. Do the panel subscribe to the view that the low sulfur fuel will A, be more expensive, and B, remain more expensive for a considerable period of time? Or do they rather subscribe to the view, which I have to say I hold, that alongside other companies, the oil majors, the producers, the distillery, will have to follow the environmental argument and reduce the price of low sulfur fuel very, very quickly? I say that because I was on the running machine this morning in the gym in the hotel, and I saw the latest school children environmental marches throughout Europe. The environmental lobby is becoming huge and will become ever bigger and bigger as we go forward. I'm sure the oil majors will want to reduce the price of low sulfur fuel very, very quickly, or be seen to be, dare I say, profiteering from the position.
Well, maybe I can make a quick comment first that, as mentioned at the beginning, we cannot discuss any individual pricing policies. So
as a concept, though, hypothetically.
It's a little bit difficult. I don't know if you
Yeah,
can make any general
I can
comments.
answer if you want, and thanks for the reminder to the fact that we can not go in detail on pricing, and on top there is a lot of factors that will impact pricing, starting with the crude price. So I would say it will be quite impossible to answer this question now.
I think,
Okay.
if we look at, it's the old market adage, isn't it? It's supply and demand, and something that's in greater demand will normally indicate a higher price. So, you might expect that if distillates are in greater demand, then, the price would be higher than, say, a residual fuel that is no longer has the level of market demand that, it previously had. So it's all market dynamics, I'm afraid. I think, we could talk about individual things, but, it's more supply and demand, I think, that's going to dictate pricing.
Thank you very much. We're just on time. We actually have to finish. I think if I can summarize this with one sentence, is that preparation is key. Do you agree on that? I think both from the refinery side and the shipping company side. So I'd like to thank you very much. Our panelists will be around, I think, for a while. So please feel free to talk to them afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christos. Thank you. By the way, I'd like to make the point, not only we talked about compliant fuels, but we have also been compliant with the European Union regulations. So double applause for Christos and the panelists. So.